Welcome to the Collapse Life podcast. I'm Zahra Sethna, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for another episode. This week, we're sharing a fascinating conversation I recently had with Limina, the host of the Human Responsibilities Tribunal podcast. One of the most rewarding parts of creating Collapse Life has been connecting with others working on similar projects. It's been incredible to bridge the digital divide, exchange ideas, and share resources with like minded creators. We're so grateful for these connections, and we're excited to introduce you to Limina's work. Make sure you check out her channel on Rumble. And if you haven't already, please subscribe here to help grow our community of curious and thoughtful minds. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Limina, where we explore courage, resilience, and the importance of regaining confidence in our own capabilities. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Human Responsibilities Tribunal. I'm Limina, and I am super excited today to welcome Zahra from Collapse Life, Substack, and podcast and video media. Zahra, I've met doing two previous interviews and panels on pets during a time of crisis and transition, and one on digital detox. And it quickly became apparent that we have an interesting philosophical history that kind of meshes together. So Zahra and her husband started the Collapse Life, which is a multi-dynamic media entity built on education and advocacy for individuals and communities, I would say. You have a history with some of the big ones, New York Times, United Nations, CBC, and you straddle the North American border between the US and Canada, which I do love, which gives you an interesting perspective. The systems have become often combative about who's better, private, public. This idea that Canadians are nice and Americans aren't, what have you, depending on what side of the border you're on. So I think that'll bring an interesting perspective to our talk today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to really focus on how you and your husband personally and then commercially and culturally have cultivated Collapse Life. So welcome, Zahra.
Thank you so much, Limina. I'm really happy to be here.
So let's start with the entity. Let's just talk about what is Collapse Life.
Sure. So, Collapse Life is both a blog and a podcast that we started just over 1 year ago. And we named it that way, sort of tongue in cheek. We were thinking of things like Cottage Life magazine or, Southern Living, these very gracious, glossy magazines that lay out the comfortable lifestyle. And so we were thinking Collapse Life would be this tongue-in-cheek kind of glossy magazine for a lifestyle that's dying, basically. And so when we say that, what I mean is it's not collapse as we think of it from apocalyptic movies in Hollywood. It's not that everything comes crashing down in a big pile of dust overnight. But realistically, the lifestyle that we have come to be accustomed to in North America is changing. And
Right.
we know that, we feel it, we see it. The American dream that previous generations were promised is no longer within reach for a lot of young people. The geopolitical power is shifting away from the Western nations and especially away from North America, shifting towards Asia, towards other places, and all of that impacts us. And so we say, just like you would want a doctor to be honest with you if you had a terminal disease and say, all right, here's what's happening with you. Here's what your prognosis looks like. Here's how you can manage. We want to do the same with Collapse Life and sort of say, let's just honestly look at what's happening. What are these shifts? And not take a doomsday perspective on it and say, all is lost, let's just give up and bury our heads in the sand, but say, all right, well, now that we know this and we understand it, we can wrap our heads around it, understand what's happening, and figure out what maybe we can do about it. And even if we can't do something about it, at least we know we can identify the shifts that are happening. So that's really kind of what Collapse Life is all about. It stemmed from us asking a bunch of questions, finding certain people who we trusted who had a particular perspective on things, and then saying, well, maybe we can have them help us explain some of these things. So yeah, that was the purpose.
And it's interesting to me, sort of the view on it. I know that I've seen some comments that says, this is negative. It's about collapse. That's the end. But to me, I don't think that way. When we look at the history of the Dark Ages and the Renaissance, where that ended and where that started, is the teaching of mycelium. People think it's, death and decay, but actually it's a transitory learning about how do we take this big pile of shit we've been dealt and then make it fertilizer and grow out of it, right? And so for me, I really see what you guys provide as a great stopgap in that transition time between, we know this one time is ending, and how the next time begins is dependent on us.
Yes, absolutely. And on all the tiny little decisions that we all make now, which are going to have a huge impact on ourselves and on future generations. And so let's actually actively accept that. Civilizations come and go. We know that. If you don't pay attention to history and accept that civilizations come and go, then you really are burying your head in the sand. But humankind, it still exists. We are still here today as the living, breathing testament to the fact that civilizations have come and gone, but human beings still survive. And so, maybe the great American experiment is over, or it's changing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be another phase that comes after. And maybe that's better. Maybe we can admit that there were a lot of problems with the system as it was. And some of those problems will persist, but looking forward, what are some of the things that we can take forward that will actually make things better in the next phase, whatever that might be, in this next era that we're coming into, and resist some of the more sinister agendas that seem to be being pushed at. This is a moment of vulnerability when things are changing, and when they're changing as rapidly as they're changing right now. We are vulnerable if we're not vigilant. And so, one of the things that you and I have spoken about, and we've spoken with David Gardner at the Freedom Conversation podcast about, is transhumanism, and allowing technology to have too strong a role in our lives, and allowing algorithms to make decisions for us. And so these are some of the things that we try to talk about in Collapse Life, so we can say, let's draw some lines in the sand of, as things change, what do we want to hold on to?
It's interesting to me when you talk about that, because I talk, I still have a small resiliency building counseling, if you will, sort of practice, and it's it's interesting to me that I find that during this transitory period, and one of the things that might lead us into transhumanism is our inability to deal with this transition, our feeling of incompetence, because we lack confidence in both ourselves as human beings, but also in the human race.
Yeah.
We sure think, and maybe we have become weak and small and dependent, but we don't have to be.
Absolutely.
Like the history of our species is one of adversity and triumph over cataclysms and crises.
And if we've become weak and dependent, we should look at that and say, why? And has that been forced on us? And in many ways, I think if we do look at that, we will see that institutions have encouraged us to become weaker and more dependent, because perhaps is easier to control, or because it's easier for corporations to sell us products when we're weak and dependent. There are any number of um, reasons you might come up with for why, but perhaps we don't need to be um, ruled by fear, and that's been imposed on us.
Mhm.
And I think, there's many examples that you can look at. COVID, I think, is the one that really woke people up to say, there was a group of people who fell prey to that fear and did everything that they were told, and showed just how obedient they were willing to be if fear was the major kind of lever that was being pulled. But there was also a group of people who had the exact opposite reaction, who saw fear mongering being used as a tactic, and said, oh, okay, so something's going on here. They're pushing this hard and trying to make us afraid of something that we probably don't need to be quite so afraid of. What's going on? What's behind this? Where are the ulterior motives? And I think the fact that that happened, and that so many people started asking those questions all at once, was actually a really good thing. That was a collective consciousness that we needed. We needed to be woken up in a pretty traumatic way to be able to recognize that we'd been sleepwalking for many years before that.
Mm. It's interesting to me, like, I think if we back up even pre-COVID and look at sort of both of our backgrounds, mine's in social work, yours is in journalism, but both have like a root system in education and advocacy, and truly wanting and desiring best outcomes for humans, whether it's women's rights, the rights of children in poverty. For me, Indigenous rights is a huge thing that I see so differently now. So, do you think your questioning of the COVID narrative actually backtracks into changing your views on things like UNICEF, or changing your views on women's rights, or the patriarchy, really? My dogs are staring at me out the window, freaking out for some reason. I'm going to let you talk about this. I've got my earphones on. I'm going to let them in. I'm sorry this isn't very good, but there might be a coyote out there
Yeah,
because she's
please
freaking out.
go look after the
But
dogs.
but but can you tell me the root system of which this questioning of the COVID narrative? Let's go back and talk historically about some of the things you were an advocate for along women's rights, child rights, maybe the United Nations,
Yeah.
both the idea and actually the institutions. And then what was there a pinnacle moment that changed your mind? Was there one thing, or was it the accumulation of things that even precursed COVID, where you're like, I don't think
Hmm.
things are exactly what I think?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that there was necessarily one moment, but definitely the
I'm
the
listening.
the number of moments started to build um, before COVID happened. So I was a young ideologue when I joined the United Nations, in my late 20s, early 30s, and it was an organization that really seemed like this is a way that we can. Um, Make some changes and help fix some problems in the world. And I will say that, I did get a chance to travel to some countries while I was working with the United Nations. And there were definitely some programs that were funded by the United Nations that were helping people. Um,
Right.
and so when I was on the ground in those countries, I felt a little bit better about some of the work that we were putting our attention to. Although you very much see when you're in those countries the way the UN apparatus works. So the types of homes that UN staff live in, and the types of vehicles they're driven around in, and all of that is fine and fair, and people can make those choices. But there is it's the United Nations. It's not a small NGO or a Peace Corps where people are living and working within the communities that they're helping. Um,
Mhm.
so there was a little bit of what my husband is often referred to as champagne socialism, that we live comfortably and well and go to nice restaurants and stay in nice hotels while we're in a developing country trying to help them get themselves out of poverty. There is a
Right.
strange rub or tension that happens there. But having said that, there was I want to emphasize that there were and there continues to be some good that comes out of that. And I know many people who still work with the United Nations who are very good people who have the best of intentions. And so I want to make sure I make it clear that it's not everyone who works in those organizations is not evil, just as perhaps everyone who works in a pharmaceutical company is not an evil doer who wants to see other people harmed. Um, it's just more the system, and I think it became even clearer once I started working at the headquarters level how how political it really is, and how much just kind of chess playing is happening, and people create their own little power structures in headquarters and um,
Mhm.
move their little pawns around to get things done, and it becomes so removed from the actual intent of, like, let's say, helping end malaria in Africa because children get very sick and die, and how can we fix that? You see it seems so far away and so far removed. And I worked in communications, and so my job was to write advocacy pieces or develop key messages about reports. I got to see the data team put together statistical reports, and I saw some stuff that made me kind of question, well, really, what, leaving out China statistics and then reporting something as a global phenomenon when you're subtracting China from the equation. You can't say that this is happening globally if you're leaving out the largest population on earth from the statistics, and putting that in a tiny footnote somewhere, and writing a headline that this is happening, like those kinds of things. It's a small and perhaps not well formed example, but certain things that I saw that I would question, but I didn't really have the power or the voice to be able to make any difference. I would just question them quietly.
Well, it's interesting to me that you bring that up and so concise. I years ago read a book called The Wisdom of Whores. I was just looking it up. I put it in the chats. It's called The Wisdom of Whores, Bureaucrats, Brothels, and the Business of AIDS. And it was written by a lady, Elizabeth Pisani. She worked at the United Nations, and that's sort of her thing is I was there and I saw how AIDS was made into a business that generated money for the United Nations, and how it was super twisted in its statistics and whatever, what have you, to bring in the most money for the United Nations to make the most bureaucrats and the most business. And I just keep going back to this misery industry idea of, I think it was Eisenhower that warned us against the military industrial complex, that if we make war profitable, then we will make more war. And I think
Mhm.
if we make misery profitable, we will make more misery. And that's where we're seeing things like better health, but we're also seeing the blooming of um, of the United Nations into this monochromatic monolith that can't really move and seems to be both self-serving in its ideology and in the service of corporations now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit it nail on the head. So, I mean, the United Nations should want to put itself out of business. You would think that the goal should be, we want to create a world where we are not needed anymore. Um, but that's not, I
Right.
mean, if you asked any UN bureaucrat, is that what you want? They would say, no, 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 we will always be needed. We will always be needed. There will always be some crisis that will need the world to have a venue where we can come and sit and decide on things. But I mean,
And I
in
don't want to pick on the United Nations
Mhm.
like they're the only ones. We can see this within our governments, our
Yes.
municipalities,
Yeah.
anything that is sort of preying on the people. And so it's interesting to me how I used to see this, and maybe I'll just share my experience and then you can share yours. Is like I even as a student in social work was writing papers on United Nations, how they're dealing with children in poverty and you know, indigenous peoples and what have you, because the Canadian government would often leave out all the First Nations and Inuit people in
Mhm.
their demographics of childhood poverty in
There you
Canada,
go.
which is a big miss, right? It's a big miss. And then you'd see the United Nations come in and take over and point that out. And but then I guess I changed my mind easily when I saw it wasn't working. Same with things like safe injection sites. I was a big advocate for that. It only took me 1 year to see I was wrong,
Mhm.
and so it's interesting to me um, that once enti- corporate entities or NGOs start making money, they don't, they won't admit they're wrong, and they also don't want to be right because then they would work themselves out of a job. And
Yeah.
then and us personally, there seems to be something inherent in the empathetic do-gooder. I'll call myself that, not you, but the empathetic do-gooder that doesn't want to admit that the thing you advocated for to help other human beings was so off base that it might even be causing harm.
Yeah.
So that was my theory. And the big one for me for women's rights was watching a former friend of mine insult men and put them down in front of her teenage boys. And
Oh.
I could, I could, I could feel their inner selves sink as I sat
Mhm.
there. So that was the one. And then the safe injection site, which so clearly became a war zone and not what it was touted for, that you could visually see it in my city of 100,000, were two massive blows
Yeah.
for me. So I would just like to put that back if you're willing to share something so personal. What were the ones for you that you were like, I really have this empathy and this desire to make my communities better, but I'm off base here.
Yeah. There were so many small ones along the way, and sometimes they didn't really hit me at the time. I think they hit me later. Um,
Mm,
but I think just as you said, certainly around sort of feminism, I,
yeah.
of course, always felt strongly about equality and, being treated fairly and getting paid the same for the same work and all of those things, but there was a moment where I realized I can't use feminism as a label for myself. I wouldn't call myself a feminist because the way modern feminists describe themselves is not something that I would agree with. And it is just like you said, a lot of very knee jerk kind of binary thinking that all women are good and men are bad. And it's because of men that we have all the problems in the world. And if only women could run the show, all those problems would be solved. I mean, how naive
Mm,
is that? Like there's never been a evil woman ruler in history, or
yeah.
all women, because we have maternal instincts, we all have perfect compassion and perfect empathy. I mean, it's just silly, but you can't have those conversations with people because, again, as you said, you end up in these very you get pushed into a corner. So if you're not a feminist, then you must hate women and you're betraying your gender. No, let's just use some common sense. Let's just have a conversation about what's right and what's wrong. I mean, some of the best bosses I ever had during my career were men, but also
Mm,
I had great women bosses. Some of the worst bosses I ever had were women. That's N of one, my anecdotal experience. But I also have brothers. I have a wonderful husband. I had a fantastic father. So I'm not willing to stand in a crowd that says all men are bad and all women are good. Like, it's just, it doesn't make any sense. There's gray areas that we need to explore. And that is just, that has carried through in all the questions that we ask now through Collapse Life. It's looking at something, especially when it's getting painted as a very clear black and white issue, and sort of saying, really, is it that clear? Or, what am I missing? And it almost, the experiences that I've had almost kind of forced me to ask those questions. Sometimes things are as clear as good versus evil. Really, there are some things that are cut and dried, but I found it harder and harder to be able to have conversations where you could just ask questions. I was working with, after the United Nations and after the women's empowerment NGO that I worked with, I was working with a think tank based in Winnipeg. I was living in rural Nova Scotia, and it was a think tank around sustainable development and ending fossil fuels completely. And moving to, green energy, renewable, all those nice words.
Yeah.
So here I am living in rural Nova Scotia, where the nearest grocery store, other than just a little general store, was a 25-minute drive away. There was no public transit route that ran past my house. There was no way I could ride a bicycle all the way to the store and back, especially in winter. So, how was I supposed, and then even if I had a hybrid or an electric vehicle, where was I going to charge it down the lighthouse route in Nova Scotia? There were few and far between charging facilities. But also, the village where we lived, it sprang up because of fishing. And there were still scallop fishermen and lobster fishermen who ran their boats out of our village. How are they going to function without fossil fuels? How are they going to drive their truck to the pier, put their boat in the water, run it out there, drop their pots, pick them up, bring their catch in? How are they going to do that without fossil fuels? And I don't have the answer. And it's not to say that we shouldn't try and find solutions, but I remember trying to just have that conversation with someone who had more expertise on this topic, someone who worked on the energy team at the think tank. To say, I look around in my life and I wonder, in a place like where I live, how is that transition supposed to happen? And when is it supposed to happen? Because, hearing you speak, you talk about it as though it's way too late already and we need to have this happen tomorrow. And basically, she didn't have an answer. And she sort of hinted that we should all just leave that village and go live in a city where we can take a bus and where we can walk,
where it's smart and it's built for you. It's smart and you'll have no choice. This will be your 15 minutes and that's all you need, because for the amount we talk about this toxic patriarchy, we're living in a malevolent matriarchy, something that's so empathetic, they're going to love you to death, right into your mom's basement where she is just going to care for you until you're immobilized. That is our government in Canada currently. And it's so full of holes. And this one was one for me too. Like, I do care about the environment. I take a lot of my life lessons from the natural world, but we
you live off
overlook
the
how
land.
much.
So obviously it's very important to you. I mean, and that's how we were in Nova Scotia as well. I totally understand that. Go ahead. Sorry.
How much fossil fuels does it take to make the sustainable infrastructure? We don't talk about that. We don't talk about how those electric cars are plugged into coal burning generated electrical mechanisms, like or the lithium batteries, what an environmental nightmare. And so maybe we could dig into this example further, because one thing me and you have talked about, you and I have talked about, is this really fucked up binary that everybody's into. So you know, I call it the Dave Rubin effect, is like the left left me. So now, so I was this gay guy on the left with the Young Turks, and now I'm this full on Christian on the right that's opposed to all these things. And it's
Yeah.
like, how do we get out of that thinking where we could still believe in a better environment, a better um, relationship with our natural worlds, and still desire to maybe go away from fossil fuels? Because one of the things that's really interested me is that since the 70s, we've had excellent engines and patents for engines that use a fifth of the fossil fuels that have been bought up by those same corporations that are saying that they're going green now, but they actually just want to explode in a whole nother market, you know, that how we can still live out our values. Because what I'm hearing with you and what I feel internally is my value system is the same. I value the natural world, both for the relationship I have and the food it provides me.
Mhm.
And over here, I am being presented with this binary of either you love the environment or you're a right wing zealot that hates the
Yeah.
environment. And that those value systems are completely different, but I feel like the value system for me has remained the same, still
Yeah.
a desire to want to protect something that is so valuable, so much so I don't want to be on a team.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that I ask myself all the time because, I really want to make sure that I don't move from one echo chamber to another, or, to avoid one mass formation, to use Dr. Matthias Desmet's term, and then just
Yeah.
end up in another. I don't want to be, rejecting being brainwashed in one way, but then find myself being brainwashed in another way. So I do try and question and check myself. And I think both my husband and I do, and we help each other with that. Are we just falling into traps or buying into narratives that appeal to a particular, belief that we may have, or may just ego stroke us in a particular way, and then we just
Mm-hmm.
end up getting, um, you know, moved off onto another side. And so I think that's part of it. I think is that all of us who are thinking and questioning and feeling like the world is changing around us need to keep asking ourselves that question. Am I being brainwashed in another direction, and just in a direction that appeals more? I think we do need to keep asking ourselves that. But I think so
Mm-hmm.
many of us have felt like, yeah, I'm still the same person. I still believe the things that I believed. I'm not a bad person. I'm not one of those people. But the spectrum is just shifting across. So where I used to be over here, the spectrum has moved, and now I'm still where I always was, but now, you know, the name or the label that would be put on me is something very different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think all of that is just silly. And I think that it's purposely trying to distract us and trying to keep us from actually putting our fingers on the real issues. Um, and the more that we
Mm-hmm.
can fight and bicker over silly things like labels and, are you right wing or left wing? Are you woke right, or are you just woke? Who cares? I think the issues that we need to deal with in our society are very real, and there are solutions, and there are some really smart people who could come together and figure out those solutions. Um, and they're trying to keep us away from each other. They're trying to pull us or distract us so that we don't, so that we don't circle too closely onto these things. Um, and I think some of it, like, sorry, just one last
Yeah.
thought, it's
Yeah.
just, one of the things that I've heard during this COVID period, and having met so many people who feel exactly the same as what you just described, and using that Dave Rubin example, the left me, there were so many of us who felt ideologically aligned on one side, if you had to name it as such, and who have now moved away from that. And because we live in a binary black and white world, if you're not on the left, well, you must be on the right. Um, but in hearing that, so there was a term that I heard in someone describing that, which is that their compassion had been weaponized. So, we have this natural tendency to care for those who are more vulnerable in society and want to help. And that's what drew us into these so-called movements for, in my case,
Mhm.
children's rights or women's rights or the environment or whatever it was. Um, and that caring and that compassion and that desire to help was weaponized by more powerful entities and politicized, essentially.
And monetized. And
Exactly.
monetized.
Yeah. I thought that was
It is
just an interesting
amazing to
term.
me that the helping industry, how massive it is. I like one of the things that Michael Malice has said, which is there is no left or right. There's just the people who have power, and you aren't one of them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
going back
So
to George Carlin as well, used to say that all the time, right? There is no left or right. We talk about this
mhm,
all the time. It's a uniparty. It's just, yeah, it's the powerful and the powerless. And, we need to remember that we are absolutely not powerless. We actually do hold the power. Um,
mhm.
we're told all the time that it doesn't matter, or that what we say or do will fall on deaf ears, and these corporations, they rule the world, and you can't stop them. But actually you can, and we have in so many ways. And I think that is, again, just going back to what I said earlier, that is why they're trying to pit us against each other and make us think that there aren't as many people thinking the same way, um, because when we do come together, they know that they're in trouble.
It's almost like a Munchausen syndrome of the humanities, right? I love you so much, I'm going to make you sick. And if that gives me some good PR within my community, all the more better, right?
Mhm.
Uh, it's um it's sort of a strange thing, and I think it's like that human condition of that tug of war between your ego wanting to make it look like you've done right, that you've educated, that you've empathized, that you've advocated, that it'll distort the whole world to make it seem like it, than the actual realistic person inside who values so much a desire to help that you can't fool yourself, that you'd put on the brakes and say, holy crap, this ideology that I really invested in isn't working, and I actually care for these people so much that I'm going to put the ego and the industry and the money aside to rethink things.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's why we started Collapse Life. I think we felt we were seeing certain things, questioning certain things, and wanting to do something versus do nothing. Not just, not being a bystander to what's happening. And the thing that both my husband and I were trained in was journalism. So telling
Yeah.
stories, writing, editing. We have some rudimentary skills in, media production. So that
Mhm.
was the talent we've been given, and we thought, how can we use this? And um, thanks to technology, you can start a blog overnight on Substack, and you can start a podcast through StreamYard and YouTube and Rumble and all those, really easily and really inexpensively. So, there is
Mhm.
definitely some benefit to having those tools, those technological tools available. And so that is what we thought we could do. And, um, there are times when it's been tough. We've been doing this for just over a year. We have 3,000 subscribers on Substack.
Oh,
Thank
good for
you to, I mean,
you.
it's, 3,000 is great, but you see other people who have 150,000, and you think, how did they do it? But anyway, so, it was a tough slog to get to the 3,000 mark. And we haven't even made 1,000 followers on YouTube, because the algorithm on YouTube is dead set against supporting the kinds of things that we want to talk about. And we have to self-censor and actually hold some of our conversations back from YouTube, because we know that the types
Yeah.
of things that we talk about will get struck down on YouTube. And so that's an ethical challenge for us, because we don't want to have to self-censor or question what we can and can't say, or use funny buzzwords that aren't quite the thing that we want to say. It's just not how we roll. So those things are frustrating. And there are times when that frustration can feel a little overwhelming and you think, why do we do this? What are we, we're not making any money really off of this. We are so lucky and grateful that we do have some people who pay for subscriptions or who go on Buy Me a Coffee and give us a small donation here or there. And we're so grateful to all of those people. They do it because they want to, not because they have to. Um, but we keep doing it because every once in a while there's just this little glimmer. We'll get a message from someone who says, thank you for doing what you're doing, or that article really made me see something in a different way, or um, yeah, just comments that we get like that, that we think, we're never going to be huge. I don't want to be huge. I don't want to ever lose the authenticity of sitting down and writing every article and producing every episode of the
Mm.
podcast. Um, so it's not about numbers, but it's about reaching, even if it's just a small but really dedicated group of people. It feels like we're actually doing something. And in this moment when things seem pretty significant, it's nice to feel like we can do something versus just feeling helpless and not doing anything.
Well, one of the things I think that it goes against you, but really cultivates respect within your listeners, and I'm not online very much, which is kind of why I'm not that great at some of the things I do, but that I do respect you guys for is the lack of alarmism, even though it is collapse live. So, you'll see commentators or even prepper channels, especially, that's like World War III has started today. And it's like, well, one, I think that analysis is wrong. I think it probably started 8 years ago. But but I think that that's just looking for clicks. So if you're really trying to live out a value system, which is what I hear you saying, the through line that I'm hearing about collapse life and you as an individual is this very strong systemic thinking that's rooted in a value system that doesn't adhere to the binary, but it also doesn't adhere to that alarmism and hysteria that perpetuates clicks. So it's been
Yeah.
a choice of like real education and advocacy, and skill building and information cultivation, that isn't alarmist, that isn't like,
Exactly.
oh my gosh, World War III today. So,
Right.
click on me and I'm going to help you through this. It's like, listen, we're entering an age, and, COVID might have been the pinnacle of the crisis, but now we have to settle into that transition time so we can have some futuristic thinking for the generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the benefits of not taking off and having our channel kind of rocket uh, very quickly is that we're not just trying to feed the algorithm. Obviously,
Right.
that alarmism, that clickbaity headline is going to get more attention, but that's
Mm.
not what we're after. We want, thoughtful readers and viewers. We want people who actually watch the majority of the 45 minutes to an hour conversation that we have, because we think that everything that's said in there is worthwhile. So we don't necessarily need thousands and thousands of people who are watching 30 seconds of the video. I'd rather have a dozen people who watch it through to the end and actually learn something from it, or share it
Mm.
on to somebody else who, because they think, oh, this is really useful, really um, an interesting perspective on things. And it's never about me. It's always about bringing a guest on who has that perspective. So I may not
Mm.
agree 100% with every guest that comes on our show, but I've invited them. They are my guest. And so I treat them with the respect that they're due. I don't, it's not gotcha journalism. I'm not trying to bring people on to make them look foolish or to poke holes in the thing that they believe. They're allowed to say whatever it is that they believe. That's why I've invited them on. Um, and I challenge them, but I do it respectfully, because it's kind of like I've invited them into my living room, and I would never treat someone rudely who is a guest in my home. So that's kind of the approach that I take on the podcast. And in the comments on our blog as well, people come on
Mhm.
and tell us we're wrong or that they disagree. And that's welcomed. We want that. That's the whole point of all of this is we need to keep talking. We need to be throwing things at each other, challenging each other, learning. We need to keep learning. If we just keep reading the things that we agree with and reinforcing the old stale thoughts that we had years ago or months ago or minutes ago, we're not going to get out of the moment that we're in. And we really need to. We really need to figure out what's happening, keep our eyes up and ahead, and start strategizing for where we want to be. Otherwise, we're lost.
What do you think has happened in the media? Let's speak as a media as a general, and then maybe see it as a through line as the transition into the other side. Is there seems to be a real lack of appreciation that once used to been for the binary. The binary has become combative instead of complementary. The masculine and feminine weren't supposed to butt heads, they were supposed to work together. The younger liberal mind with the older conservative mind was supposed to mesh together to find this median in our society. And like the push and pull of a tug of war that we're now in, a push and pull is also a beautiful dance, right? And I think we've really lost that art, partially because the media has become so clickbaity and the internet has, but also because the powers that be have really cultivated that divide. None of our leaders got up and said at COVID, this is going to be the fight of our life. Let's come together, let's work together, put things aside, and we can come together, and use everybody's different perspectives together. Instead, it was you're either right or wrong. You're either a shitty man or a great woman. You're either the left thinks they're the best and most benevolent, and the right thinks they're the most benevolent. And we've really lost that sort of art and value system of being complementary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the media has really amplified that. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's as bad in society as it is reflected in the media. I think that there's a lot more gray area. And I think you mentioned it, if you um, strike up a conversation with someone in public, if you're in the supermarket line and you have a little chitty chat with the person standing next to you, you'll probably find that you agree on a lot of things. You may not agree on everything, but you'll probably find that actually most regular people working through their lives are not out to get each other. But if you then go home and look at social media or read the headlines in the mainstream online, whatever, I don't even want to call them newspapers anymore, um, you'd get a totally different view of the world that, there's all these rabid crazies out there and they're all trying to kill each other. And
Yeah.
one group is good and kind and generous and vulnerable and marginalized. And the other group is aggressive and arrogant and trying to cause harm and chaos everywhere. Then you walk out in the world and you go, I'm not seeing that. I don't see the chaos that the media is trying to tell me. And I think, again, it's our responsibility, every single one of us, to keep reminding ourselves that and remind others of that. We are not that someone said this in a comment on Collapse Life a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about North Carolina, and how basically communities came together to help each other. And I thought that was exactly what we needed at that moment. We were in the lead up to the election here in the United States, and media was making it seem like we were headed towards civil war, regardless of who won the election. And then Hurricane Helene happened, and it was devastating to North Carolina. But neighbors came out to help neighbors, and people flew from Montana to North Carolina with whatever they could pack in their suitcase to help. Firefighters came from Canada to help. That's what we do. And I think we needed that as a demonstration of, we still have that humanity. We still have that desire and ability to help each other. And people came out and signaled that to each other. They showed each other to themselves. And anyway, going back to, so someone commented on Collapse Life We are not who they say we are. And I thought that
Oh my gosh.
that is so important to remember. We are not who they say we are. We are who we are. We showed in hard times that we can be the people that we want to be. We can be the neighbors that we want to show up on our doorstep when we need that
Yeah.
help. They are there. That's who we are. That is who we are. And so don't believe what you're seeing in those headlines. Those headlines are there to sell more papers, although it's not a paper anymore. It's whatever. It's a machine. It's a corporate
Mhm.
entity that needs to make money for its shareholders. And so whatever works to sell more subscriptions is what they're going to put out there. And
That's right.
like a drug, you just need more and more and more. It needs to get more subversive, more aggressive, more crazy. Otherwise, people get inured to it. So yeah, I kudos to the person who said that because it stuck with me.
I need to find them. I want to have them on. That hit me so profoundly because I have been saying to people, we weren't lacking information on COVID or anything. We're lacking the story, and this is what I'm hearing from you. We're lacking that story of the human race goes from cataclysm to cataclysm, and we are strong and we prevail. It is our human condition to rise up, right? And we've that story is being rewritten in the virtual world, and it's starting to make its way in the corporeal world, and we're starting to take it on in our psyche, and it is not true. And one of the things somebody said to me, well, Canadians, they'll never do anything, we're complacent and too nice to actually do anything. And I'll say to you, honk fucking honk.
Yeah.
We brought you the world, the truckers convoy that sparked
Yeah.
something internationally, and that came from Canada. So why are you telling yourself that story?
Yeah.
Why are you telling that story that we will never and the other one I don't really like as a story is that people want to be told what to do. And when I'm in line, I talk to everyone, and I'm telling you, people don't like to be told what to do.
Yeah. Not they don't want to be told what to do when they don't respect who's telling them. And
Yeah.
I think that's what our public institutions have really um, not yet realized. There is no
Mhm.
trust or respect for the public institutions anymore. And it had been eroding for a while. And COVID
Mhm.
really was the final nail in the coffin. How can we? I mean, maybe as a society, and certainly maybe in Western societies, maybe we do want someone to kind of give us some structure, some guardrails, a little discipline
Yeah.
here and there. We need
Yep.
rules to be able to get along as a society. We need someone to
Mhm.
say this is okay and that's not okay. And we've always done that,
Mhm.
whether we had government or not. We've always fashioned some kind of rules by which we can
Mhm.
live together. Um,
Yeah.
but you have to have trust in the process, and you have to have leaders or managers who you respect, who you can say, yes, I will do the thing that you're asking me to do because I know that you're fair, and I know that you're measured, and I know that when you give me facts, those are true facts, or you've done the research correctly. All of that
Mhm.
has been blasted out now. I don't trust science anymore because I've learned all the many ways that
Mhm.
research can be corrupted. And I've seen it with my own eyes while working in institutions like the United Nations. How can you
Well, and
trust
that's the
anymore?
binary. That's the binary we see now. And I've had a couple people on my channel where I'm like, this is ridiculous. You're going to tell me your science on health is right? That's coming from these same institutions, going through these same journals, but now it just says what it wants. It's like fighting over who's going to eat the rotten meat. I just say, let's kick that rotten meat out. Let's do a do-over. And that's what I see, you know, uh Collapse Life, and there's a couple other ones that I really like. I like what David's doing, but I really noticed the change in Greg Carlwood on the Higher Side Chaps, where he's got all this conspiracy, although he still does this, or alternative histories or whatever, and he's gotten into sort of some of this health stuff and just totally leaving that paradigm and shooting it down, altogether,
Yeah.
and really getting into taking responsibility for yourself. And I think that's the usefulness of Collapse Life, and some of the transitions that other ones like the Higher Side Chats have done, is giving you education to make individual choices on your own, so you can live outside of that network that we all know is rotten.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're not ready to completely separate from the system, at least make better choices within the system. So, I think there's sometimes a reaction where people say, yeah, I know, um, I understand big pharma is rotten, and, the Rockefellers bought it all out in the early 1900s and blah, 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 blah. But what are you going to do? So I'm just going to keep doing what's easy and convenient. Or, yeah, I understand that the whole climate change thing has been, politicized and, taken to an nth degree because of an agenda that needs to be pushed. But what are you going to do? So, people just go along to get along. And I think those people um, are the ones that those of us who are ready to take bigger measures, stronger measures, and maybe try and live outside the system, need to help those who are not, to be able to understand the system that they're in, and at least avoid the really big potholes, at least avoid running into the very dangerous walls. And that's where I think it's important for us to not be alarmist and to not fall prey to too many crazy conspiracy theories. Maybe, I mean, I hate that phrase, conspiracy theory, because it's so easy to put that on any idea and then just completely negate it. I think we need to question everything, and then, really find sources, examine those sources, use the intelligence that God gave us to actually read from original sources and not just believe some talking head like me on the internet who you've never met before. It's out there. Go and read some stuff, and ask some questions, and find people that you do know and trust and ask them what they think. Um, but those of us who are kind of a little bit more advanced and have been questioning this stuff for a little bit longer, need to stay open to those who aren't quite there yet, and not just write them off, because I think they're going to need some help and guidance along the way. It's difficult. It's hard when everything you've ever kind of put your trust in starts to shake, and the foundation starts to shake. It's hard, and it's easier to just run back and say, no, 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 it's okay, it's okay, everything's going to be fine, I'll just keep doing what I've always done. And so we need to be able to help them without scaring or disrupting people's lives, but at least help them find the safer routes, if that makes
Well, it's
sense.
interesting to me, like, yeah, it does really make sense to me, because it was funny, just probably 6 months ago, I looked at my husband and said to him, is everything we ever thought a lie?
I know
And
that
so my
feeling.
sort of awakening around that is, I got very, very sick in 2009 in Canada's stellar public health system. And then I just basically, they don't, it's not what you think it is anyway.
Mhm.
And I remember that story changing, right? And it was almost like I had lost my religion, and I was a social worker too. So I believed in that social safety net. I believed in our healthcare. I believed in the infrastructure Canada had laid down, that it was going to protect us. And then I realized, not only was I not going to get healthcare and they didn't give a shit, I was also not in line for any of that social safety net. Uh,
Mm.
uh, and almost, so it was like a whole paradigm collapsed on me. So some parts of me really empathizes and gets people who are clinging, who don't want to look that in the eye, because it's not one thing. It's not like, science is crooked and doesn't give a shit about you when it lives itself out in a medical world, both private and public. But then it's the social safety net, then it's the government, then it's your citizenship.
Mhm.
And then you question everything you
Mhm.
felt pride in. And then that story of how you've lived out your life and your humanity within your little confines collapses. And so you want to stay willfully deluded, because I think people intuitively understand the domino effect of
Yes.
admitting the one thing. And it
Yeah.
is very difficult, and it is very emotional, and it is very individually unnerving to whip that paradigm out from underneath somebody.
Yeah. But once the house of cards falls, people, I
Mhm.
think, feel like, oh, that's going to be very scary. But what's left standing is you. And if people recognize that having resilience, having faith in yourself and the abilities of your own yourself and your family and your community to be able to rise up and to say, I need to learn how to do first aid now. I've never done that before. Okay, I can learn that. You can, we being being reliant on oneself is not something that we should be scared of. I don't know why society has made us that afraid of being self-reliant, but I think it's just part and parcel. I don't think that they did it on purpose. I don't think that there were people who sat in a room somewhere in 1975 and said, let's raise a generation of people who are going to be terrified of going outside. It's not like that, but I think that there were just a number of different things that layered on top of each other through convenience, through consumerism, through now technology that puts everything at our fingertips so we don't have to think for ourselves. We can't read a book because we have no attention span, and we don't go outside to just, feel the air on our skin anymore. All of those things conspired to bring us to a place now where we want the nanny state looking after us, and we're afraid to look after ourselves. And I think that's the crux of it, is just to start, no matter how small, just start doing some things for yourself that you've right now handed off to some other entity. So,
Yeah.
you like to eat tomatoes, you buy them in the store, stop doing that. Grow them yourself.
Hmm.
You like to eat
Right.
eggs, you buy them in the store, stop doing that. Find a farmer nearby who has chickens
That's
and buy
right.
your eggs from the farmer. Small,
That's right.
small things that you can do that you suddenly start to take a little bit of agency back. Then, you want to learn how to um, stop taking so many prescription drugs and maybe take a more natural herbal route.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
easily do that. There's so many resources. There's so many books you can read. There's amazing people who put out so much information for free. Pick a path, learn it. Like, if you want to learn natural first aid, or how to take the plants that are in the forest behind your house and turn those into medicine, just pick one thing and follow that
Yeah.
through. And then how strong you feel suddenly by having that knowledge and by having those resources, and by knowing that when I walk in the woods and I look at that plant, I know what it could do, or I know that that one is actually one I need to stay away from. Then you're not afraid anymore because you have that knowledge. Knowledge really is that power. I just think step by step, we can start feeling more confident in ourselves, and then feeling less like we need to rely on others to look after us in those ways.
And I say this to people: competence, having skills and abilities, builds confidence, but not the other way around. You can't have fake confidence that builds competence. That's why skill building is so important. Finish this sentence for me, because I'm really moved in a lot of different ways by what you've just said. Collapse life is there because it believes in individuals, because they are.
That's great. Because individuals are powerful, and I think we just need to recognize the human experience that we all share. I think if we remember that we're all going through the same thing. We all come from different places. We've all had different histories. We've all had different hurts along the way, but we can recognize that in each other. And we have so much more power than we give ourselves credit for. And so much more intelligence. And Collapse Life is about trying to bring a community together so that there are people who share their own experiences and their own knowledge with each other. It's not about me and my husband, preaching from a pulpit. We don't know anything. All we do is kind of transmit other things that we see through the filter and lens of our own experiences. And we're not always right, and it doesn't matter. But, we're trying to bring together a group of people who at least sort of see the world in a similar way, or come at it from a similar perspective, but from all around the world with different worldviews and different life experiences. And together asking these questions and just feeling like we're not alone, that's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And it really puts the power back in people. I called my channel the Human Responsibilities Tribunal on as the sort of dichotomy of the Human Rights Tribunal, because we're so laden with rights, we forgot the other side of the equation. The complementary side is responsibility. And you want things to be your fault. You want to be responsible for things, because what Collapse Life is doing is showing you the moment you take on those responsibilities of the individual, you have power, you have competence, you become an asset to the people you love. They can stand on you, and you can be the ship that the tide that raises all the ships. You you can be that. You can rewrite your story of one that needs the government, that needs technology, that needs an NGO to do for them, and become this individual that not only can do for themselves, but because become so competent they can do for others.
Yeah.
That their power, their resources, their responsibility shifts out into the world, right? Like a network. And I think that's what it's really become clear just talking to you, that there's a real value system rooted in what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
So
articulating it, because I don't know that that was necessarily so clear when we started it or as we've come along, but you're absolutely right. It's the idea is that we want people to help we want to help people understand what's happening so that it doesn't take them by surprise, and so that they can not just um survive whatever it is that's happening in the world right now, but actually thrive through it, to take the experiences of whatever is happening in your community and actually let them make you stronger, because you have those competencies, like you just said, and we have those skills, and you have the foresight and the open mind to be able to see and not bury your head in the sand, but say, okay,
right,
I get it.
right,
This is happening.
right.
I don't like it, but I understand that it's happening. I may not understand why it's happening, but I know that, something's going on here. There's a power shift
Mm.
here, or a power play there, and I've seen it coming. And then I know where I fit in that, and how I might be able to take an action, or at least to just sort of see the silly narrative that's being strung out in front of
Mm.
us, and parse through it, see the undertones of it. That thing, coming from a media background and um, working in this field, that's one of the things that we notice quite often, is the way words are used,
Mm.
and how
Yeah,
certain
it's like
things.
a lexiconic warfare, right? Or what? I don't know if that's even a thing, but that's what I'm calling it, a lexiconic warfare right now,
Yeah,
right? Where
yeah,
things don't mean what you think. And I think part of that is taking those words back. I
yeah,
mean, some of the most profound words now have been rendered, they're so watered down as to mean nothing, like racism or misogynist. I mean, like, does anybody even listen to that? And that's some of the most awful and profound hate that
Yeah.
we could do to
Yeah.
somebody. So tell me this. I think I've always been a contrarian, like former punk rocker, skateboarder from way back, never have a hard time doing what I'm told, which is not to say I don't mind doing what I'm told, but it has to make sense. Sort of maybe an inherent dissenter, even. I call it an edge walker, somebody that belongs nowhere on the binary, and so you're free to think everything, sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. That's my view of myself in terms of characteristics and how I feel like I plug into the world, almost like I don't belong. And so I'm everywhere. If probably doesn't make sense. What's your view of you in the world? And what are those characteristics that you've carried with you that sort of allowed you to look in the face of this paradigm that undermined sort of, it seems like every part of you from your actual uh your career down the line. What were those characteristics that allowed you to look at that? And then since you have looked at that thing that kind of unraveled your paradigm, what were the things that held you in place so you could walk on? So I like this idea of walking on, and this is what I think Collapse Life is doing. We see young men walking out, we see people plugging in, but we don't see very many people take a look in the face of it and walk on, gather up their resources, their skills, their gifts, and you're going to walk through this and you're going to take people with you. That's the story. What's your story? How's your story? Tell me your story of you
I
in
mean,
the.
it's so interesting. I am not a contrarian, or maybe I am now, but I certainly wasn't. That's not how I would characterize myself in the past. I um was pretty much a conformist, and certainly um had a picture of myself as just following the kind of natural path, get an education, get a job, have a family, that kind of thing. And I never planned to stray from that or, be anti-authoritarian. But I mean, I guess I have a logical mind and practical. So, when when you see things that way, and you see something that seems illogical, or when you see contradictory things, people saying one thing and doing another, or saying two things that seem to be contradictory to each other and believing them in a double speak sort of way. When you have a worldview like mine, which is sort of logical, you just kind of go, that doesn't make sense, I don't get that. And that's maybe where I started. I will say, my husband was way out ahead of me on a lot of these things, and was reading publications that I wasn't. He would be reading them and share things with me, and I would kind of skim them and go, oh, I don't know. They were. I wasn't quite there with him. So we were living in New York City during the great financial crisis in 2008, and he was seeing it all happening, and
Yeah,
already
yeah.
kind of predicting where a lot of things would go. And I didn't understand half of it. I really didn't, but I have full trust and faith in him. And so if he thought that that was true, then I was, I wouldn't question it. I just didn't understand it. It took me a while to catch up with him. Um, but now we're very much kind of together on the way we see everything. I did definitely come around to seeing things similarly, and and likewise. I mean, I think we've both helped each other. We question things together, and we ask each other, what do you think about this, or does this make any sense? And so, it's definitely been a journey that we've been on together. And I feel very fortunate about that, because we have seen a lot of people, especially through COVID, who didn't within a family or within a couple, they didn't come at it from the same perspective. And it
Yep.
was very often very destructive for them.
Yep.
And that's very sad to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when, I was working with a medical organization founded by doctors who stood up against the kind of mainstream medical apparatus and how it was responding to COVID. And in one of the cases, one of the doctors who risked everything and lost his career and let his medical license expire because he decided he wasn't going to go back and work in a hospital. Um, he and his wife didn't see the world the same way. So he had really put himself up there as a public figure, and you need that support, and he didn't have it. And I found that really heart rendering. It's
Mhm.
so hard. It's hard to do it in private, but when you're, that visible, to not have the support of your closest must be very, very difficult. So, we do consider
It's
ourselves.
interesting. It's interesting too, even the people that didn't come apart in their relationships, and I sure feel this, and this is the story I heard most often, was the husband saying, I didn't want to get the vaccination, but my wife told me, get your ass in there and get it. You're going to keep working. I
Mm,
like my house in Kelowna. My kids are going to play hockey and you're going to do this. And so two things. What does that do for a partner, male or female, when your most loved, I guess, relationship has decided you will trade in your sovereignty for stuff? Like, I can't imagine a man saying to a woman, I'm going to turn you out on a street corner because I like my house in Nova Scotia or whatever. It was such a turn of events for um, particularly men to sell out their physiological sovereignty for a paycheck. And me and my husband, we call it the golden handcuffs. We saw that a lot in the
yeah.
oil field where it's such big money. And I get it. It's scary. And my husband lost his job. Actually told them to go get fucking bent, which I'm really super proud of.
Proud.
Shout out to my husband, who doesn't listen to any of these. But it just is for me, I think too, gosh, that must do something for you in your standing, but also particularly for men, it sure shuts down that masculine feature of protection, the resolve to stand between you and your family, the the person at the gates, that warrior. It sure shuts down that male mechanism that we are going to need in the not too distant
Yeah.
future, and that frightens me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's hard because I can't speak for other people in the situations that they were in. And obviously some people could not afford perhaps to lose their job, or
Mm-hmm.
for their kids to not be able to go to school, or whatever. I can't imagine what it must have been like. But I do think that overall there was a huge lack of courage um, during COVID, that a lot of people just took the easy path because um, they didn't want people on social media to think a certain thing of them, or they didn't want to have to deal with a loud mouth in the grocery store because they weren't wearing a mask and everybody else was, or whatever it was. I do think that a lot of people
Oh,
who could have made some simple choices. I mean, there were some heartbreaking choices, and obviously, like I said, I can't put myself
oh,
in those people's situations, but there were definitely moments where probably each one of us could have said, "Yeah, that's fine. I'm not gonna let fear control me." There was one
mhm.
instance which we've apologized for where, um, when we lived in Nova Scotia, we invited friends came over, we were sitting outside. We didn't want people coming in our home. This was when, we still didn't know what
Right.
COVID was or how dangerous it was. And so we decided, our home is going to be our green zone and, only we will go inside. And so we asked our friend to go and have a pee in the bushes. And we feel so badly about that choice now because it was just a lack of courage. She could have easily gone in and used our bathroom and we could have wiped it down with a Lysol wipe and it would have been fine.
Mhm.
And so we've apologized to her. Sorry, Dawn. But those are just the small moments where every single one of us could probably investigate ourselves and think, what could I have done differently? But there was just, I think again, this maybe goes back to the idea that like we've we've delegated so much of our sovereignty and our authority and our decision making to others that
Yep.
when we found ourselves in this moment where we didn't know and we had to choose, we didn't have the strength of character and we didn't have the confidence in ourselves to be able to make choices. So we asked people who were near and dear to us to do things that we should not have asked them to do because we were afraid. And that's the lesson that I hope that we'll all reflect on so that we don't do it again because it wasn't necessary. And the harms that were caused from the simple and trivial to the massive and life-changing, the harms that were caused should never happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. But I really, when I hear that story, I hear it's that collapsed life is built on a scaffolding of insight and I guess fluidity, right? Of being able to say, and that's probably the thing that is made you be able to take a look at that is a real desire for change and a real ability to have insight and look back and say, gosh, I was wrong here. Because courage isn't built on a root system of perfection. It's built on insight and an ego strong enough to say I was wrong, and a value system so rigid that you can't deviate from it. You'll leave an ideology before you leave the value. You'll leave a job before you leave the value. You'll walk away from a society and a government
Yeah.
and a rule system before you leave what you value, which is so clearly uh, people, stability, and resilience, like the indomitable, I guess, phoenix that is it is the human spirit.
Yeah.
It's going to prevail because we have before and we will
Yeah.
again, and it's just that belief system, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and through doing this, we've been able to meet more and more people who continue to just strengthen that resolve that we will come out of this better and stronger because like just like this conversation that we're having, we were able to meet through the wonders of technology and
Yeah.
because you have a podcast and because I have a podcast and anyone can have a podcast that we were able to know that
Yep.
each other existed. But you're right. I think, what if the couples that you used as an example had articulated to each other what they believe in and value and that they both agreed, yes, this is the fundamental thing that I will never change and that we hold true between us, then they
Mhm.
wouldn't have come to that position where they asked each other to do things that they didn't want to do or that where
That's
they
right.
gave up their personal sovereignty because that value would have been the thing that they shared. And um, it's not too late to use this as an opportunity to to
I love
question
that.
that and to
Yeah.
say, what do we believe in? What do we value? What do we want our our life to be about, our relationship to be about, our community, our society, our country, our world, like, take it from the lowest to the highest level. And, um, I think that there's a lot of crap that's happening right now. There's a lot of crap that's gonna
Yeah.
happen. Um,
Yeah.
but it's all been done before. I mean, and that's one of the things that we've been learning along the way and growing in our kind of spiritual life and examining life through kind of that lens of belief, and it reminds you this has all been done before. It's all, none of this is new. People inflicting pain on other people, people having power over other groups, eh, you know, human history replete with this. So
Mhm.
what happened then? Who were the Davids fighting Goliaths then? How can we recognize those people now, and how can we be those people? I mean, it's, I think that there's a very hopeful message that can come out of this. And we always try at least to find a little bit of a silver lining, or a practical solution. Or at least sometimes maybe we don't end every story with that, and we're not trying to be Pollyanna, but sometimes it's just a wake up call to say, do you see this? Do you recognize it? We've done this
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the most insightful part, and has contributed to the non-alarmism within your uh, media, is that it's almost like how I feel is this seems to be the human condition, the cycle of the human condition, where it ramps up in it, and there's some sort of authoritarian, and then the clock ticks. But one of the things I do like about the competency you is trying to instill in people, and the resolve to take back our individual responsibilities, means that we need to be in check, so that as we tick forward and go through this transition, we're not the ones trying to be authoritarian on the other side, that
Exactly.
we've become so robust and grounded in ourselves and our values that we're not the next tyrants, because we are already in danger of that.
Yeah. 100% agree.
Yeah. So why don't you, I'm gonna say this statement. I wrote it down, and it was something that was really on my mind, and it's really becoming more apparent. I don't mean to be so emotional, but I'm a little bit of a weirdo. And then the through line of it. We are a species created and evolved from adversity. It is our most grounding strength, emotionally, physiologically, and communally. Where does our story go next?
That's such an interesting frame on it, because I think our modern, certainly Western society over the last, time, let's say the decades that you and I have been alive, um, it's been about comfort and convenience. Not it's we our lives haven't really been, we maybe had personal adversity, but as a
Yeah.
society, everything just kept getting better and better and better, easier, more convenient, faster technology, faster methods of healing illness. And so I don't think that we have told ourselves as a society that we are born of adversity. And that may be why we are where we are right now, facing, the end of an era of convenience where things aren't things are getting harder. It's getting more expensive to do things. It's getting The lead times are longer to get things. It's a cycle, as you said. And so we may have reached the peak and we're sliding down the other side. And I don't know that as a society we recognize that, adversity is the shared experience, because it's been so easy and comfortable for us for so long. Um, but
Our whole bodies are made around adversity, from how we build muscle to how we build an immune system. I
mm,
see no reason why it's different for our emotional self. And that's why I think people feel so traumatized. They actually are trying to make their own adversity now, so that they can build themselves. But really, all you have to do is go out in the world and not wear a mask when you're supposed to. That's adversarial enough some days. You know what I mean?
most people actually try to avoid that. We feeling cold is actually good for our body, right? There's a whole kind of
Yeah.
cold therapy. Most people would go to the ends of the earth to avoid feeling extreme cold or extreme heat or any kind of adversity. We've
Yeah.
become so inured into that comfort level. And it was actually something that you said on one of the calls that we were on previously, that it's another line that's stuck out to me, which was, to paraphrase it, that living is not the avoidance of dying.
No,
In the way you said
no.
that, really struck with me, because yeah, living is very different than just spending every day trying to avoid being uncomfortable or trying to avoid this being the day that I die, right? Um, and so, I think that it's time for us to actually grow up and be a little uncomfortable and ask ourselves uncomfortable questions, put ourselves in a position where you have a conversation with someone who doesn't agree with you, and
Yep.
have a civil conversation with someone who holds a different point of view. My goodness, what would that look like? Or,
Yep.
maybe instead of taking the elevator, walk the stairs, and you
Yep.
might feel out of breath, and that's okay.
Do something hard. It's really interesting me in the health realm, which I'm super involved in, is now it's like there's a blanket now that regulates your temperature while you sleep. So you're at the optimum all the time. Health is not having things perfect all the time. It's having a strong body that can throw itself against
Right.
viral challenges or bacterial challenges or even just physiological challenges. It's interesting to me, and I'm going to toot my own horn and brag a little bit here, even though this is your pod for you, but I did shoot a really big buck this year, and I
Good
was
for you.
outside. I was out in the bush, and I'm an older lady. I'm in my 50s, right? I go out there. I have to haul it out. I'm out there by myself. I shoot it. I haul it out. I had to build this whole contraption out of old sticks to get it in the back of my car because I'm out there by myself and blah, blah, blah. And then these three 30-year-old guys drive by truck hunting. It's taken me 2 hours to get this deer in my car, and I was proud of it. Um, and they're just hunting from their truck. They all got their guns. They all got their Tim Hortons coffees. They're these young guys. And I thought, that's why.
Mm.
Because I just needed to feel strong.
Yeah.
And nobody can take that away.
Yeah.
And, hunters mostly stop and say, what you got? And I could see in those guys' voices when I said, are you guys just hunting from, are all three of you hunting from that truck? Just um how I felt about myself at that moment and how they felt about themselves at that moment was so starkly different. I would never have given up that challenge and the
Mhm.
backaches I still currently have from that challenge for anything,
Yeah.
and doing hard things, nobody can ever rob you of that feeling of strength and rigidity and just how you feel that balanced and that stability in your life, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And, be okay with failing. I think that's another thing, that we don't put ourselves in positions where we might not succeed at something. We just say, no, I'm not going to do that because I might not make it. Well, you know what? You might not, but you might. And then you might learn something from that experience of
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
tackling a challenge that you didn't think you could do. And that
yeah,
will springboard you onto an even bigger challenge that you didn't think you could do.
yeah,
But if you stop yourself from doing it because you think you might fail, you'll never do anything. You'll never push yourself harder. So, yeah, we need to
yeah,
make ourselves uncomfortable physically
yeah,
and
yeah.
emotionally. And we need to be okay with failing, but make sure that we learn from that. If you fail at something, analyze why. What could you have done
We're built
differently?
for that. We're built for learning, experiential learning. Our minds, excuse me, particularly men are built for experiential learning. Boys, I think the worst thing we ever did was put young boys in a classroom,
Mhm.
you know, or any children. I think sitting for 8 hours a day was probably one of the worst ideas. So I think we have a really clear view of free collapse life,
Mhm.
present collapse life. Tell me the story of future collapse life for you and your husband.
Great question. Um, I mean, I think one of the things that we talked about when we were doing our digital detox webinar is we need to have more in real life experiences. And I think that that's something that we would love to do with Collapse Life, is actually bring together the people that follow our podcast or read our blog in some way where we can actually meet up in person and
Yeah,
share our own knowledge and experience and just kind of come together. I think that that experience of being in a room together with people who do see the world similarly to you in these days when we're so isolated from each other is amazing.
mm,
There's really no um there's no substitute for that. Just even just, you know, having casual conversations with people who come from a totally different part of the world, but feel the same way that you do about certain things. It's just, there's something really grounding and helpful about that. So I don't know what that might look like, but I think that's something that we would like to aspire to. Um,
mm.
we will keep doing our podcast and our blog on collapselife.com and, invite everyone to come and join us. And we appreciate every single reader and viewer and we do it for free. We do it because we want to, but we appreciate those people who do subscribe and upgrade to the paid subscriptions. And so I think in future we'd like to start doing a little bit more exclusive content for those paid subscribers. We've done a few things
Okay.
um, in that vein. We recently put out right before Thanksgiving a guide to having uncomfortable conversations and Thanksgiving.
Mm,
How do you
yeah.
tackle some of these hot topics with people without isolating them or driving them farther into their corners? So those are the kinds of
Mhm.
things that we would like to do more of for our paid subscribers. Um,
Right.
and we're really open to ideas as well. So if people have things that they'd like to see us tackle or formats that they'd like to see us tackle, we'd love to hear it. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. I also I'm not much of a comment reader, but I think you do really have thoughtful readers. One thing I also wanted to say, without just sounding too ass kissy either, is that I do like that you have both written video and audio, where you're really spanning that multimedia, because it's not really for everybody to sit and read things, especially right now. Some people are busy, and it's nice to have the podcast side of it. So I really like that you do touch base on that, and I can see how meetups would be very useful and really honor that mystery that happens, that we all know exists when we're actually sharing corporeal space, right?
Yeah.
So this is your Substack.
It is.
And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I really like too that I really like this China's societal cracks are showing, and I do really like that you guys this is the one I'm listening to this afternoon, the silent crisis. I think that's going to be really interesting for me, but I do really like the dynamic topics that you guys talk about too. I think it really has something for everyone.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we try and vary the format. So we do have the video once a week, which is usually 45 minutes to an hour. So for some people that's a little long, but usually those conversations we need that time to be able to explore who the person is and have a nice conversation. We do
For
two
sure.
articles a week that look at various topics, and that, as you said, can really
Mm,
range from the societal to the economic to just kind of the theoretical. And then on Sundays we do what we call the little weekly roundup. It's called Notes from the Edge of Civilization, and it's just
yeah.
little short clips of something that might have
Mhm.
happened the last week or two, that something you may not have noticed, and our little take on it. And so
Mhm.
that's really quick and easy to digest, to just sort of say, it's a little bit like, kind of a clown world report. Here's something crazy that happened.
Mhm.
But yeah, so we try and vary it so that there is something for everyone. And we so appreciate your giving us this time to showcase it.
Yeah. Yeah, how can people get a hold of you if have a topic of interest too, do you allow people to just message you and say, I'd love it if you guys explore this idea? Or
Yeah, we'd love that. You can email us at info@collapselife.com, or you can come on to the Substack and leave a comment. And we're also on Twitter at collapse_life. And so any of those ways, we're very open to feedback and to hearing what people like and don't like and want to see more of. This is, yeah, it's the close of um, the first year of doing this, just over a year. And so,
Mhm.
we'd love to start fresh next year with more things that people would like to see.
Well, I really appreciate the honesty that you guys have shared, your insight into changing your mind, which I think is really important right now, but also your dedication to helping people become more resilient, and I guess your dedication to that human spirit that I think is so really, really important in this time.
Well,
That story.
thank you so much. And having these conversations with you helps us to clarify it as well. So we
Mhm.
really appreciate you and all you do as well.
Thanks for your time. Merry Christmas.
And to you, Merry Christmas.
Take
We'll
care.
talk soon.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to visit collapselife.com to subscribe to our newsletter. And while you're there, check out the Collapse Life store, where you'll find a curated selection of items that let the world know exactly how you feel. Just a heads up, the Collapse Life team is debating taking a short break over the holidays, likely the last 2 weeks in December. We will post some content to keep you going in between bites of turkey and ham, such as a clip show or a highlight reel from 2024. And then we'll be back after January 1st with exciting new guests and more thought provoking conversations. But we're not there yet, so be sure to come back next week for fresh content. Until then, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.